Welcome to the But She's Your Mother podcast, where we talk about all things related to being raised by narcissistic parents. Our guests are adult survivors of child abuse. Please note that this podcast is intended for mature audiences and may feature topics such as emotional, physical, and sexual abuse, domestic violence, self-harm, suicide, murder, and eating disorders. Opinions expressed by guests and survivors are their own. Some names may be changed or blocked out to protect minors, victims, and survivors. Thank you for listening to But She's Your Mother, the podcast. 17 years later, she got me for a millisecond, and all she had to do was say, I love you, I miss you, do you want a relationship? I had been out for 17 years. I'm like, yes, please, right?
Yes, I know. Yeah.
So
I can't imagine not wanting that with your child.
yeah,
Because during the Barbie movie this year, it was a big thing to take my daughter, and I took one of her friends, and we all dressed up. And I mean, it was I think for a lot of people, it was very nostalgic. And during the movie, my daughter reached over and she just wants to hold my hand, and we're holding hands, and she's 9, so they don't do that as often anymore. And I just I was so in the moment. And then as soon as she didn't let go and we held hands a while, I just looked down at her hand in mine, and I just thought, God, why did my own mom not want that from me? I don't want to start crying, but you don't want to wreck your own moments, but those thoughts come in, like, I've never had that. So when I'm having a really special moment with my daughter, because we're so close, she's my bestie, there are lots of times where I think, God, I'll never know what it's like to have a mom love you and cuddle you and hold you and tell you I'll do whatever you need, be there. And it's just, I'm at my
yeah.
I don't miss any of my kids' events. I don't even know if I've ever missed I don't think I've ever missed some of their stuff. I mean, there's probably one time, but they're like maybe 12. I'm at everything. I'm like this crazy sports mom. So I just can't imagine not, like, what goes on in your heart and your brain that you don't feel a bond with your child. I know that's a her thing, but it's still, healing's like an onion. Like, you just get healed, and all of a sudden, like, a Barbie movie moment will come and you'll have like a feeling about it.
I'm 30 years out, and actually it's funny that it was before the Barbie movie. My daughters and I was in Florida visiting them, and we went out to a Barbie bar because I've been team Barbie for a really long time. Like,
you and I are the Barbie
right?
girls.
I didn't have to go shopping for the Barbie movie. I already had the outfit actually.
Yep.
Right? And so my daughters and I got to spend a bunch of time together when I was in Florida. And there were a couple of things. There was one where they played this joke on me in a dressing room, and they had me come in, and they both had these gowns on that were just really ostentatious. And they put this whole joke, and I'm laughing. And for a split second in my laughter, I thought, God, what would it have felt like to do that with my mom? Look what my mother is missing, right?
Yes.
So infuriating, so disrespectful when somebody says, but she's your mother. I wish she was my mother. I wish she was my mom. She's supposed to be there for this stuff now. And so that brings me actually to my next question, because this is another thing that I think that we get a lot of. I know that when you went no contact initial times, you didn't have children yet. So when you started having children, were you worried about them not having extended family and grandparents? And how did that feel to you?
Oh gosh. I was such a crazy person back then. I really forced it, and I think it overwhelmed both my parents, because I guess my brain was like, okay, now's your second chance with my kids. I don't know why I thought they'd be different with my kids when they weren't a good parent to me either. So I was constantly forcing them to come visit, or let me come to the cabin, or let me do this. And it was just always rejection. And then I get mad, not talk to people. And I think there's a certain point one of my really good friends, one of my best friends from elementary school. I just talked to her for a couple hours a couple nights ago. She actually said something to me that really made me stop feeling like that. And this is when I had kids, because she was like an aunt. She is still like an aunt to my kids. She said, Amy, I don't want to hurt you, but I'm just going to tell you, your family doesn't care about you at all. They don't give a fuck about you. If they did, they'd be there. If they wanted to, they would. And I don't know why I needed to hear that from a party that wasn't my therapist or my another family. I just needed to hear it. And I wasn't sad. I was like, okay, other people see it. It validated what I'm feeling. Yes, this is true. I shouldn't have to be calling and forcing and then getting mad. And, like when I had my kids, nobody came to the hospital. Nobody at all. And I was really, really hurt. But of course, my mother-in-law, who is my ex-mother-in-law now, I adore her. But she, of course, she was there for all of it. But it's embarrassing when like your own family doesn't come to anything. And I'm pretty much over that now. But there are still moments when like, not often, but when we're at like basketball or gymnastics and I see like friends of ours bring their grandparents, and I know some of them well because I've been friends with some of these people up here for 15 years. And my kids, theirs don't ever show up for them. They don't come. They don't want to. They don't like that stuff. They didn't like it for me. They don't like it for them. And I live for it. It is my kids, but and when they have kids, I already have totes of grandma stuff for when I'm a grandma, like all their favorite, all the expensive toys, the good wood stuff and all that. I have like 2 totes already from when I'm a grandma, and my kids aren't even in high school yet. So I don't know. I'm excited to be a grandparent and go to do all that stuff. I just think some people aren't in. I don't know why they don't do it. I can't speak for them, I guess.
Were you worried about how your kids would feel then not having grandparents around in that extended family?
Yes, I was worried about that. But they do have a grandma here that they see and they love, and that they do get that. So it's I think what helps us not have such an issue with it is the universe and God have graced me with being chatty, and I have a lot of friends, and I have a lot of childhood friends, a lot of friends from college still, and of course I've made a lot of new friends here. We have a really nice neighborhood, so they have a good support system. They have long-term.
They have you, and they have their dad,
friendships, right? And things like that. Like we have some, and they have, of course. We're boring, so we're home every day, and neither of us drink really too much. Definitely not around the kids, just because it's heavy in the system. So I've already, age appropriately talked to them about alcoholism's really strong in your blood. You're probably not going to be able to drink much. You know what I mean? Or if you do, you're going to have to be really careful, like I am. Like, last year I think I drank 2 times. It just gets to be a turnoff. Sometimes, like if I'm out with the girls, then I will, but
here and there. But I know what you're saying. I mean, I raised my kids the same way because my grandmother was an alcoholic, right? So they're functioning, but an alcoholic all the same. And they've always been raised with that awareness. Did your kids ask about like your mom and dad or your siblings? Like, were there conversations that needed to be had, or were they just
I mean, in the beginning years, because I've been on and off, no contact with my dad too. But in the beginning years, they would ask about my mom. And I'd say, you know what? She lives far, far, far away. So we can't see her very often. Because he's little, he's a toddler. He's like, so do you have, he wouldn't say, do I have a grandma? He'd say, do you have a mom? Who's your mom? And then he's like, oh, she lives far away like Santa Claus. And I said, yeah. So for years, he'd tell everybody my mom lived with Santa Claus at the North Pole. That's in his brain. And for my dad, I mean, he's a single guy, and he's, he's retired. So I know he's like gone out of the state quite a bit, fishing and stuff like that. And It was his brother that, you know, essayed me when I was a kid, and some of the family tried to cover that up. Being he was on the cease and desist, clearly he's part of that
Yeah.
posse. But it is hard on that one because you know, he's missing out on so much because it's weird how this happens. And I have not talked about this yet at all. But my kid, he's so much like my dad. We have a pond that's stocked with fish. He's down there 2 or 3 times a day fishing. He's on his third fishing pole. He everywhere we go, he buys orange Tic Tacs, just like my dad. It's I don't think I've had a such. I was like that with my grandpa George, though. We're just the same people. It's weird when you get a kid who's like exactly like your dad, and and he knows all this thing about fishing, and he's learning it from like YouTube, you know. And I'm just like, God, like my dad's missing out on so much. There's finally someone in the family that fishes as much as my dad. They could have had a great thing together, you know. And it's that part makes me sad. And he asked me a couple weeks ago, he wanted another fishing pole, and I'm like, you're on your fourth pole for the summer. How many poles do you need? He's like, how many poles does your dad have? And I'm like, God, probably 30. And he's like, see, I need that many poles. So they know,
Yeah.
you know, they ask questions. It's just it is a hard situation though, because I don't feel safe with my dad since he sent me that cease and desist. And now how would I ever trust him again? You
Yeah.
know?
And the thing is, you know, when we look backwards, because I did the same thing in the beginning of when I had kids.
Yeah.
I gave my mother access, you know, and I realized that the reason that I did that was because who my mother was to me, I thought I deserved, and I assumed
Mm-hmm.
to them would be who they deserved her to be. I still
Yeah.
clicked into the fact that the abuse is about the abuser, not about the victim, right? So it's a really, I
Mm-hmm.
think people will ask that question a lot. Well, with everything you went through, why would you allow your children around these people? And that's typically the reason why that happens. And we're trying to repair the family. We're trying to do the job all by ourselves with nobody else
Yep.
up emotionally.
Yes, it's like, hey, I learned all this in therapy. I've been in therapy for 2 years. And then you try to bring it back to the family, and they're like, you're bipolar,
Or
which who
yeah,
cares
they'll
if I
say you
am?
don't
I'm
sound like
not. I
you.
actually have
Yeah.
never been diagnosed with that.
Yeah.
But
Well, they'll say
um,
things like, you don't sound like yourself. Well, yeah, no kidding. I've learned how to set a boundary and you don't like it, right? That's the very
exactly.
common
Well,
thing.
and you want something different. So like when my son is doing all this fishing every day and just all these conversations, like my heart just sinks, and I'm like, God, I want my kid to be fishing with my dad. My dad could teach it. My dad taught me a lot about fishing. He could teach me so much stuff because he, you know, like when I was teaching him how to tie a knot and stuff, my dad taught me that, you know. And so there's these moments where I think my family thinks I'm so evil for talking about it. But God, I went through a lot of hurt. There was 15 years of abuse with my mom, and that continued till I was in my 40s when I finally officially cut her off, you know. So there's a lot of, I just don't see why. My question to them is, why is the abuse okay that went on, but it's
But
not
talking
okay for me to
about it isn't.
talk about the abuse? No, I'm the villain because I talked about it, but the person that did the abuse isn't the villain. My brain will never comprehend that scenario.
Yeah. And because that will never make sense. It doesn't make sense. You know,
Yeah.
these are healing opportunities that don't have to end up in no contact. Being able to
Mm-hmm.
talk about it, taking ownership actually makes you a good person, not a bad person. But they don't look at
Thank
it
you.
that way. They just want to sweep it under the rug and keep their victims in place because
Stop
that,
bringing up the past. The
oh,
past is over.
yeah. Yeah, it happened 5 minutes ago. Oh, it's in the past, right? When you when you started talking about the trauma of CSA, was that on TikTok?
Mm-hmm.
Brought that up to the family before? I mean, how did that
Oh
roll?
no. I was at my uncle had a surgery in Rochester. This was maybe 10 years ago. I don't know. I have no idea. But anyways, my uncle had a some surgery in Rochester that we all went down there for. My dad and sister picked me up and we're at the hotel. And my sister she was in the room one of the times it happened, and she brought up to me that she remembered it. And I was really surprised she remembered it. And because it went on a few times. And my great grandma, Lena, also walked in on it and broke it up another time. But like, I don't know if anyone told my parents. They never said anything. When I told my mom about it, or now that I knew my sister knew, before she brought that up to me, I did tell my husband at the time about it. So I was starting to like talk about it finally. Yeah. But my mom said, why wouldn't you tell me something like that? You're supposed to tell me stuff like that. And she like blamed me, like scolded me for it. So I never talked to her about it again. It wasn't a safe spot for me. So he did die a year ago or something like that, I believe. And in the obituary they printed, he's a man of God, and he shares his word with anyone he comes in contact with, and blah blah blah. And I was just like, for you guys to print that, and then there a group of them is trying to say that he was in the military when I'm claiming that happened, so it never happened. And I'm like, because I said it happened when I was 4. I know it, the first time was before I was in kindergarten. I know this. And if it happened when I was 3 or 2, I don't know. I was pretty little then, but I do know I was not in kindergarten. So I do believe I was 4. Maybe I was 5. But they're so fixated on proving me wrong. Can you imagine going to sleep at night when a little girl has been molested by a man who's in the military, and he's in his, I'm sure, 30s during that time, has a big old beard, and you're literally trying to prove it wrong and save his face? I mean, who's going to lie about that? Who's going to publicly talk about it? The only reason I publicly talked about it is so I can help other people talk about it. So then the pedophile thing is a whole nother avenue. They need to know that we grow up and we talk and we're going to tell. And that's why I talk about it. And I've gotten a lot of people to talk about it. There's also a link in my bio to the corner house, which they can call. It teaches people how to report abuse. And I'm going to just give people a blip right now. People get weird about the subject of, well, I saw something weird, but what if it's not happening? I don't want to wreck somebody's life. It's not your job to investigate it or know if it's right. It's your job to report it, and the right people will investigate it, and they will find out if it happened or not. So please, please, please always report it. And that's my spiel about that.
Yeah, I agree with you, as a survivor as well, right? And the lengths that these people will go through to hold the lie, right? And people will give them excuses by saying, oh, they're in denial. No, they're not. They're holding the lie. They're holding the facade. They're holding the presentation and their self-preservation, right?
Mm-hmm.
They cared about the kids at all, they would show up for them. If they want to say they didn't know, okay, but what about when we become, not okay, but what about when we become an adult? At what point do you stand up and go, okay, I hear you now? They don't, because holding the lie is much more important to them. And there's never going to be an explanation behind that beyond that. There's never going to be something to make sense of it. And people, by human nature, they want to make sense out of things. So they'll say something not realizing that what they're actually doing is victim blaming and shaming and invalidating, rather than just saying, you know what, that's really horrific. And I'm sorry that they are a bunch of POSs who didn't stand up for you and still don't stand up for you.